So happy to have you here today because today we're going to dive into something that so many of my coaching clients, especially, have a really hard time with, including myself. And that is prioritization. So, we're going to be digging into prioritization. We're going to be talking about how to actually look at our overall well being and see where we're in harmony and where it could maybe use a little bit of work. So, I'm going to ask you guys definitely to work with me today because, as you know, I don't like to be here by myself. So in the chat, if you're willing to work along with me this afternoon or this evening or in the morning, I think Sonia said it's 4 o'clock in the morning in Pakistan. So if you're watching in the morning, but if you're willing to work with me today, just type me in the chat. So like I said, today we are going to talk about prioritization, but I think what's really key here is our perception. Hi, Adele. I think it's our perception of balance. Let's be honest. The word balance, as we perceive it most of the time, really is kind of a myth. Awesome, I'm getting lots of me's in here. And if you do want to play along, you might want to have a sheet of paper and a pen or some markers or something, just as a side note. But balance is kind of a myth as far as how we perceive balance. Because balance, we perceive it to be this straight line that we walk, where everything is kind of like in equal time with each other and equal energy with each other. And really, it's much less of a straight line. And life is much more like this, right? It's always kind of swaying and moving, or maybe it even kind of moves in a circle, but we're always a little off center, right? Like there's always something happening. And really, what is more realistic is for us to be in harmony with that flow of life. Because I don't know about you guys, but there's very few days that I look back and say, oh yeah, I checked all the boxes and everything was in perfect balance. And, it all just worked out exactly how it was supposed to. If you've had that day, then I'd love for you to type in the chat, I've had that day, because I want to learn from you next. Best friend in your thread said, that's when I feel sick. Haha. Yeah, when it's like spinning around in all directions. So today, what we want to look at is how do we get the different guiding elements of our life into some kind of harmony where it's okay with each day that it ebbs and flows and shifts and changes. Each week can be different. Each day can be different. So that's what we're really going to jump into. And I think that what you'll find is that the way that you utilize your energy will be very different. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into some observation. Now, we're going to, Adele says, yeah, I get dizzy too. Shirley's like, perfect balance? Yeah, no. Sabrina's like, oh yeah, I've had that day before. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of self-observation. Now, there's a reason I'm not calling it self-evaluation. Because most of us, when we go into evaluation, that also brings up some kind of judgment of whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong. So here's what we're going to do first. This, in my opinion, and in some others that I've worked with opinion, here are the different areas of our life that are kind of our guiding elements of our life. We, of course, have a physical aspect to our life. We have an emotional aspect of our life. We have an mental aspect to our life. We have I am looking at my notes, I apologize, but I can't memorize all this stuff. Give me a break, right? We have a spiritual aspect of our life. Even if you're not necessarily a religious person, you probably still have a spiritual connection of some sort, even if it's just energetically. We have our professional. We have our financial. And we have relational. Now, depending on what book you look at, what system you look at, there might be different terms, there might be more, there might be less, but this is what I feel to be pretty exhaustive. If you have others that you feel like are really important to you, you can pop them into the chat. Wendy's saying scary. Yeah, Sonia, trying to make every day a new day better than yesterday. Absolutely. Yay. Well, thank you, Lorraine, giving me a break, right? We all need notes to go on. So here's what we want to do is we want to start to do some observation. The first thing I'd like you to do is just type into the chat out of all of these. Let's see, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out of these 7 different guiding elements, where do you feel that you put most of your priority and most of your time? So type that into the chat. Or if it's something that's not even up here, great, type that into the chat. But where do you feel like currently, as you sit right now today, where do you feel like you put most of your time and energy as far as these 7 different things? I know for me, there are definitely places that get my attention. I think for many of us, the professional aspect tends to be something that we put a super heavy amount of focus into. And for me, especially as I'm building up my coaching program and my coaching business, this definitely gets a lot of my attention. Lorraine is saying emotionally, music. I'm really sorry. I have no idea how to pronounce that last name. Relational, Jan saying relational, best friend in your thread, emotional, good. Anya's saying pro, Wendy emotional, Adele's emotional and mental, Wendy saying emotional, pro, financial, professional. Good. So lots of different, I see you, Sonia. Thank you. Ashley, professional, Queen, physical for Sabrina too. So you can see lots of different people are putting different priorities someplace. So if you're following along with me and you have a piece of paper, music lover. I love that. I'm a music lover too. I really like that. You probably saw the tattoos on the neck. So if you're following along with me and you want to play along, here's what I would like you to do. Put a 1 to 5 next to each of these. So next to each one, you're going to put a 1 through 5. So 1 is that you pretty much aren't giving that portion of your life any attention. It doesn't get any energy. It doesn't really have any priority right at this moment. And just be honest with yourself. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is I'm not giving it much attention or no attention. And 5 is I'm giving it all of my attention. Does that make sense? So 5 is I'm giving it all my attention. So is 5 necessarily a good thing? Maybe not. That's not for me to evaluate for you, but probably not. So, for me, physical is actually something I do pay a lot of attention to for myself. So I might put 3. It's up there for sure. Emotional, I'd say more like a 2 because I spend some time there, but probably not quite enough. Mental, some days I feel like I overdo the mental aspect. I'm too in my head. I'm evaluating too much. Spiritual, best friend in your thread saying, okay, don't even look at my list. It's really not cute. Good. That means you have lots to play with, right? Spiritual, I'm probably around a 3. Professional, I'm going to say I'm probably at a 5 because it sucks up a lot of my energy. Financial, it's time for some transparency, right? So I'm just going to say, 2-ish. Relational, that's an interesting one for me because, relational, I feel like I have good relationships. How much energy am I putting into those relationships? Just because they're good relationships and they're healthy, am I giving them enough of my time and focus? And if I'm super honest, it's not a big focus for me all the time. So just do this with your own. And if you don't have a piece of paper, remember, you can always come back and rewatch these. You can go back through this project, and we're going to talk about how often we should do this project. But, physical is anything that you're doing. So this could be the foods that you're eating. This could be in the exercises that you're doing. Your yoga practice, your meditation practice might even fit into here if it's something for your physical body. And then emotional is, of course, how our emotions are working for us or against us. So mental is more of that mental exercise aspect. Like, how are you improving that mental space within your mind through study, through some type of practice? Spiritual, again, this could be religious, it could be just purely spiritual, it could just be a connection to energy. Like for me personally, part of my spiritual practice is that every Friday morning I go out for a hike. And so that's part of my spiritual practice. I make sure that there's a prioritization in my life to that thing. Professional, of course, you guys all know what that is. That's the time we focus on our professional life. Financial, that's pretty self-explanatory. And relational, again, it's not necessarily a evaluation of how are your relationships. It's how much time and energy are you putting into the relationships, right? So just in the chat, put one of the ones that you're finding might be in need of a little bit of focus. So in the chat, put one of the ones that you found that might need a little bit of love right now. Yeah, Lorraine, 5 is probably not so balanced, right? Maybe a little too much energy into it. So type into the chat one and, just be honest. Like, we're all friends here. We're being vulnerable right now, right? Sammy, a professional, saying physical. I think that's actually Dana behind the scenes. I don't think it's Sammy himself. Yeah, cool. Lots of people on my team with, there's some financial. Music lovers saying physical. Katie, mental. Yep. Ashley, financial. Float mid to low numbers on all of them. Okay, great, Shirley. That's awesome. Emotional. Awesome. Sonia is saying spiritual 5 times daily, an essential piece of life. Beautiful. Hard to call, Wendy. Love it. Pros for Lorraine. Awesome. Just one. For best friend, mental. Okay, so here's what you're going to do with one of them, just one. You're going to look at that aspect and think, what is something that is fully approachable? What's something that you can do this week to experiment on how to bring that more into harmony within your life? This is really key. I said experiment, not change, not become ritual, because we're going to talk about this in just a minute. But if we get to this place where we're like, oh my gosh, my emotional state is out of whack, my physical state is out of whack, my mental state is out of whack, my financial state is out of whack, oh my gosh, I need to change everything. How realistic is that? Are we really going to change all those things all at once? Probably not. So we're going to take a more harmonious, a more approachable, a more sustainable approach to this. We're going to look at one thing this week. It's one thing. And so for me, if I look at my list, I'm going to look at my 2s. Financial would actually be a great one for me to start to tackle this week, right? So for me, it's actually looking at my finances clearly and creating, this is exactly what I need to have each week as far as a budget. So just a really simple baby step. Yeah, Shirley, exactly. And one little approachable thing that I could do is just this week, just get a sense of what are my finances like each month? What do I have to make to just hit my needs, and how then can I budget the rest of it? So right here in front of you all, you can check with me next week even. I'm committing, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna just do a little bit of budgeting. So this is just an experiment though. This doesn't mean this is how I'm going to live my life every single week. And Dana, I'm gonna pick on you for a second because I can. Dana's saying that she's gonna go for a daily hike or walk. So what I would suggest, Dana, is make that a goal for a short period of time. Okay, I'm going to go for a daily walk, and maybe it's only 5 minutes. That's your minimum time. For 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, I'm going to go for a walk for 5 minutes each day. And that's the commitment. That's an experiment. It's like, okay, yeah, I can probably do that this week. That way, what you start to do is you start to dip your toes into that hole. And one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to come back and it's going to be like, you know what? I didn't have a good time. It wasn't fun for me. And so after 7 days, do you have to continue doing it? No, not necessarily. Or you might get to the end of the 7 days and you go, that was actually really awesome. I really enjoyed that hike. I really enjoyed that walk. So, you know what? I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing some more. So, yeah, definitely a big solution intention. Yeah, Shirley, that's such a great observation too. Shirley saying experimentation makes it so much more interesting as opposed to commitment. How many of you guys out there, type me in the chat, have a little bit of a challenge with commitment to things? Because what commitment does, even from a neuroscience standpoint, what commitment does is starts to ring some alarm bells. It challenges our safety because safety is also comfort. And the mind wants to keep us comfortable. It wants to keep us safe. So if we say, you know what, I'm really going to commit. I mean, I'm sure plenty of you have probably had the experience of setting New Year's resolutions. You're full force in it that first week. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, not so much. Good. Queen Rimini's with me. Adele's with me. Lorraine's with me. Awesome. So that word commitment starts ringing the internal alarm bells. Yeah, yikes, Shirley. So what is much more interesting and what is much more comfortable to us is to go, yeah, I can do an experiment this week. I can play with this. A coaching client that I had yesterday, we were trying to reshape some of the perceptions of how they work with this energy that they feel in certain situations, which they labeled as scary or nervousness. And so we were like, well, what can we do to shift that energy, to change the way that energy feels so it's not so scary, not so overwhelming? And it's like, oh, well, let's play with the energy. And the first thing that came up for them was they came up with this idea of being a child and playing again. And when we take that perception of, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to play, it doesn't ring that internal alarm bell. And it goes, yeah, this sounds fun to me. This sounds exciting. Yeah, great self-talk, right, Lorraine? So I'm going to challenge you guys. Whatever was low on your chart, just one simple, little, approachable thing this week, and just play. Don't make a commitment to yourself. Don't put any pressure on yourself. And if it doesn't happen, don't beat yourself up about it, because then you're not going to continue with it. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So now that you start to see that, and hopefully as you experiment, it starts to give you things that you're like, oh yeah, this isn't that hard to create more harmony in my life. When the pendulum starts to swing this way and it gets a little out of control, I know that, you know what, yeah, just taking a walk for 5 minutes each day, taking a hike for 10 minutes each day, or a couple times a week, that's really easy. And that's really something approachable that can swing the pendulum the opposite way. So the next part is we have to have some way to put this into the week. And I think I shared this with you guys before. If you want to take a quick screenshot, here's your screenshot opportunities to see the list. Here, I'll even pose for you. Screenshot. I like that fun, right? So the next thing that we have to do, and I do think that I shared this on a Wellness Wednesday before, but I don't think that we were able to write it down, is now it's time to put it into effect. How many of you guys, just by put a yes in the chat, or you can put a no in a yes, or Andrew, get your words under control. Put a yes or a no in your chat, in the chat, if you have a weekly planning process, some type of system in place for how you plan and prioritize your week. Put yes in the chat if you do have a weekly planning process. Say cheese. Thanks, Larry. Put yes in the chat if you have a weekly plan. Y'all, hang on. Okay, I'm back. So put a yes or no in the chat if you have a weekly planning process. There we go. I got it out. Did you hear that? Oh, Adele, I miss swimming too. That's always good times. Yes, good. All right. Lots of you do. Music lover, not so much. All right. Adele, no? All right. So here's what I would suggest for those of you that do or don't. There's a couple of things that I do personally, and this has worked really well for me. This came from my coach, Lynn Christian, which if you haven't heard my coach, Lynn Christian, speak, last week we did an awesome Wellness Wednesday with her, so you can go back on the YouTube or Facebook channel. Debbie, no, I don't. Sad face. All right, so here's what I do for myself, and this was what was taught to me by my coach. The very first thing that we want to do is we want to just brainstorm everything that has to happen that week. And this can sometimes feel a little overwhelming, but after you do this a couple times, it actually starts to feel very relieving, because I'm going to share with you some ways to make it feel more approachable. So the first thing is brainstorm the full week. This is all your to-do list. This is paying your bills. This is every single thing that you know you need to do this week. You don't have to do this right now, because for some of you, this list might get pretty big. So you're going to brainstorm the entire week. What do you know has to happen? The next thing you're going to do after you brainstorm the full week is now you're going to start to break this down more into must do and nice to do. Things only go into the must category if there is some type of consequence to you not taking care of that. So an example is I have to pay my mortgage this week, or else I'm going to get a late fee, or I'm going to be in default on my loan, or something like that. So the only things that go into this category are the things that if you don't get them done this week, there will be some type of significant challenge that's going to come up from not getting it finished. Everything else goes into the nice category, okay? So must category first. Then, in your favorite way of weekly planning, mine is I actually do a mind map. And if you don't know what a mind map is, I do actually have a video on my YouTube channel on how to mind map. But just a quick lesson. My weekly plan looks like this. So I put the week in here as the center. Then from there, that's where I do this process. So I do my brainstorm, and then I do my must and nice to do. Then the next thing I personally do is then I start to look at what are the things that I want to include in my week. So these are the things that we just talked about. I look at what's happening relationally, what's happening physically, mentally, spiritually, all those different things. And those are the things I start to chart out, like, okay, what are some of the things I want to start doing this week? And so we'll just say these are the me things that aren't necessarily professional. Then I do Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays. Sometimes I don't really do Saturday and Sunday because I want to keep them as just kind of free time. Sometimes I will put them on if there's something significant going on that weekend, like if we have a show on Sam Villa here, I put that into the actual schedule. But for the most part, trying to keep those Saturdays and Sundays open. Yeah, Wendy, not paying sales tax on time. That would be a must do, right? Adriana is saying relationships. Good. So Monday, the first thing I do is I put in any kind of appointments, any kind of standing appointments. So if you're behind the chair and you know you're working that day, put in on your Monday what time. Let's say you're working from 12 to 5 at the chair. Put in first the things that have to go in there, your actual schedule. Next, getting ahead of myself, do that for each day. So I would do that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I would put in exactly what my schedule is, exactly when I'm going to have certain appointments that week with my coaching clients. The next step then is I come to this must category. This should always go first because unfortunately, a lot of times in the must category, there's a lot of that stuff we don't like to do. So if it doesn't get put in the schedule, it probably ends up at the end of the day on Friday. And then you spend your whole day Saturday trying to catch up, right? So take the must do column and start to filter those in. It's like, oh, you know what? On the way to work, I can drop off my dry cleaning. Who knows, whatever. But you see what I'm saying. So actually put the must-dos into the schedule somewhere. Put a time and a day for those specific things. What's great that happens here for most people as I'm kind of coaching them through this is they start to see that if they do spread these pieces out, that it's like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Like when I look at it as a full week, I can fit these things in. It's when we leave it to chance, that's what becomes a problem. The second step is not here. These still don't get messed with. Leave your nice to-dos over here for a moment. The second step is the thing that we just worked on. The second step is, Dana, that would be, when are you going to take that walk? But put it in someplace that is, I hate to say the word non-negotiable because that starts to feel a little bit like the commitment monster, but someplace that it's like, okay, this is realistically someplace I can actually do this. Not someplace you can hope that you get it done, but if you're going to close your computer at 6 and go for a walk, put it at 6, right? Don't put it at, I'm gonna try and skip out of work a little earlier on these days. So I'm gonna put it at 5:30. Is that realistic? You have to decide that. So you actually schedule these things into your week. Don't leave it up to chance. Then this nice to-do list, if you see opportunities within the week that they fit, great, pop them in there. But the nice to-do list for me personally, this is just how I do this. The nice to-do list becomes the task list. And that task list just kind of stays to the side. And each day, then I look at, yeah, exactly, Shirley, you stop gambling with your time. That's a great way to put it. Each day when I wake up and I look at my day as a whole, it's like, okay, here's my schedule. Here are the big things that I want to accomplish this week. Then I can look at my day and I say, what's on my task list? Oh, you know what? This sprinkles in there really nicely. That sprinkles in there really easily. And you just kind of filter those things in. One thing, maybe you guys that are working behind the scenes in the chat, maybe you can try and find this. There's a really fun video that is the Franklin Covey Big Rocks and Little Rocks video. It's a pretty old video. It still looks like it's on the size of a normal TV screen. It's a square. But it is Franklin Covey who developed kind of this sort of planning system. And he's taking this woman through the Big Rock and Little Rock process. So the Big Rock is the must-dos, and it's the things that we've talked about, those things that are guiding elements of our life. And then the Little Rocks is all the stuff that we tend to fill up in our life. So he has this woman come up on stage, and he's got these 2 big glass jars, and he's got a pile of big rocks, and then he has a jar of little rocks. And he says, okay, here's the jar filled with little rocks. You have to get all of these big rocks into that jar that's already filled with the little rocks. Oh, good, you found it. Cool. So they just, the crew behind the scenes just popped into the chat. The link for that YouTube video is really awesome. So basically this lady's like taking these big rocks and the glass jar filled with the little stones. She's trying to like push them in and jam them in. And what a great metaphor. That's exactly what we try to do with our week, right? We have this week filled with stuff, and then we try and put all the big stuff into that week. Then he gives her an empty jar and says, why don't you take these big rocks and why don't you put them into the empty jar first? So she goes in and puts the big rocks in first, and then she takes this huge jar of little stuff. Lo and behold, if you put the big rocks in first, all the little stuff filtered around the big rocks, no problem, and it'll all fit in one jar. It's such a perfect metaphor for how we live our life, because we tend to fill up our life with little stuff. And a lot of times the little stuff might be even the fun stuff, honestly. But we tend to fill up our life with that first, instead of looking at what is higher priority, what's really important to us first. Okay, so if we start to look at the week as a big picture and put those big pieces in first, the little stuff can happen around it. Cool. So if you're enjoying this so far, yeah, Shirley, clever visual, right? If you're enjoying this so far, just put a yes in the chat. Just make sure you're here with me. Julie's saying also scheduling things like if you need to call someone at a specific time. Ooh, got Alexa to remind you. Perfect. Yes. And that's the cool thing too. There's so many techie options too. I have a great calendar that helps to like put in reminders for me and stuff. So after I do this process, I actually put it into my digital calendar to help me with those reminders too. Oh my gosh. Yes. Best friend in my thread. Some stylists should really factor in a lunch break for themselves. It helps me center myself, and for me, it's worth the time more so than taking another client. So true. The way that we treat ourselves as hairdressers, and I'm not behind the chair anymore, but we all have done this. I did it for almost 18 years, but we just schedule ourselves so tight and beat ourselves up. So good. Shirley, you're asking what kind of calendar? Let me look at the actual name of it because I always forget. It's called Pocket Informant. Pocket Informant. It's a little bit more, it's kind of complicated, I won't lie. It took me a little while to get it to work for me, but there's so many different ways that you can work off of it, like how it schedules the reminders and all that stuff. It's really good. So it's called Pocket Informant. Ah, cool. Thanks for popping that into the chat. Awesome. So we're going to keep this one kind of short, but the real key here is that all of this stuff sounds so simple, right? The huge opportunity is to change the way that we treat ourselves through the week with how this is done. Because most of us, and I put myself in this same category, when I say us, that means I'm right there with you. Most of us tend to have the expectation of ourselves that is unrealistic, that we can get it all done, we can fit it all in, we can be on that balanced path that just is this straight and narrow line that we're never going to fall off of. Then we tend to beat ourselves up when we do fall off of it. We have to recognize that the path that we walk, because we are part of this planet that moves and shapes, it goes like this. Some days it's a couple step forward, some days it's a couple step backwards, some days it's a right hand hook and then back downhill and back uphill. And the more that we're okay with that flow of life, the more harmonious we can be. So instead of beating ourselves up that, oh man, this thing came up, so I didn't get to my yoga class this morning. Instead of beating ourselves up about it, what if we just go, okay, I didn't make it this morning, so I'm really excited to go do it tomorrow. And when you look at these things in your life, find those things that you can stay excited about. Because if one of your things is physical and Dane, I'm just going to pick on you. If you're like, I hate hiking, but I'll go for a hike 5 days a week. How realistic are we? How realistic is it that we're going to stick to something like that? Probably pretty unrealistic. So if we find things that we actually have some passion around and we're kinder to ourselves, that like some days it's going to work and some days it's just not, that keeps us in flow and keeps us moving. Yeah, Shirley, great. I'm glad you're open to say that. Sometimes at the end of the week, you wonder why you're so mean to me. And here's the thing, the way we talk to ourselves about this kind of stuff, would you ever talk to your friend that way? Would you ever talk to someone that you love that way? Probably not. So shine that same compassion and that same empathy towards yourself. So again, my challenge to you this week, if you're just tuning in, you can always come back and rewatch this on our YouTube and Facebook channel. But my challenge to you this week is to really take some time and prioritization. Give yourself that space. So part of my calendar is I know every Monday morning after Mannequin Mondays here on Sambia, my first 2 or 3 hours is really my planning process. I take like 2 hours a week just to create my vision for the week. So give yourself that time and energy to add that prioritization step, and then be kind to yourself and let that stuff flow through.